Story 1. I haven't. I have Asperger's syndrome. I am 52, and I am about to go catch Pokemon all day. Story 2. I was checking out at the grocery store when another cashier walked by. She was a large woman, and the cashier checking me out loudly insulted her weight so she could hear. I thought, I'm a customer. Why would I want to hear them bully this woman? Mid-checkout, I walked over to customer service and gave them a polite but firm earful. The manager came out, I pointed the cashiers out, and he said he would take care of it. I never saw them again, but the whole time I wondered, since when do I demand the manager instead of minding my own business? Story 3. When I realized that no one was coming to save me and that no matter what I felt I had, or rather did not have, I had to sharpen up. This was about 4 years ago, and my God, did I sharpen up? There is still a lot of work to be done. But sometimes I have to stop and see where I came from and who I have become today. We all do. Story 4. Getting excited about new cleaning supplies was the turning point. Story 5. Being able to spend $2,000 on Christmas gifts for my family and not have to stress. Story 6. Hearing my child say they shoved 2 fingers into the wrong hole while putting on a glove and not laughing. Story 7. When I realized that once I'm home for the night, I don't want to go back out. Story 8. When I was in my 20s working for Child Protective Services, I had to hold a meeting with a school principal, a teacher, and the parents of a child with special needs. The father was belligerent. He was not even being investigated, he just did not want to be there. Everyone in the room was at least a decade older than I was, but they turned to me and I realized I was somehow in charge of the meeting. I told him to calm down or we could continue without him. It was a surreal moment. Story 9. When I was 19, I had to manage my father's end-of-life care on behalf of my mother, who does not speak English, and arrange his cremation and burial. I realized many things at once about what it meant to be legally an adult and to be treated like one while still feeling like a teenager inside. Story 10. I loved government-issued Joe as a kid. I remember being about 9 or 10, maybe 11 years old, and thinking I had not played with my figures in a long time, so I took them all out and just sat. I could not bring myself to use my imagination. I remembered then that they meant something significant. I put the toys away and left. Story 11. When I made the heart-wrenching decision to place my mother on hospice, we said goodbye to her a few hours later. She passed away from complications of surgery related to stage 3 colon cancer. Story 12. I was sitting at the dinner table, looking at the property taxes while my back hurt. Story 13. I'm 18, so I'm still young by most standards. I feel old because I'm always sick with the kinds of illnesses that older people get. Story 14. Being diagnosed with a life-altering illness and realizing no one is there to support you lets you know you are an adult very quickly. Story 15. I keep asking for socks for Christmas. I'm almost 22 years old. About a year or 2 ago, my boyfriend's grandmother gave me some Tupperware and a toaster. Oh boy, I was so excited. I was also very excited to get a big old air fryer. I still do some childish things in a good way. I'm currently somewhere between being somewhat adult and somewhat childlike. Story 16. Unfortunately, when my dad passed, it felt as if, along with the grief, some kind of tether snapped and I suddenly started getting things done. Story 17. I completed an out-of-network insurance claim, cashed a rebate for winter tires, and deposited a check, all on the same day. Story 18. Every day I realize I am getting older, and that I am not yet mature enough for what my life requires. Story 19. I learned that love is not enough to ensure responsibility and accountability in a person, and that control is not love. Story 20. At 20, I had to get a job and give 95% of my money to my mom. Goodbye, well-provided childhood. Welcome to adulthood. Before anyone says that's my mom, my grandmother said, "Fuck it, I'll raise him." Story 21. I had to pay my mother's rent at 16 because she would not get a job and preferred to party with every man she brought home. Story 22. When I was around 13, I realized that my parents would be better off divorced, and that the internet would provide endless opportunities for connection and growth. Around age 23, I overcame many inner struggles and finally made a clear path toward a balance between financial stability, adventure, and passion projects. Around age 28, I realized I had reached those goals, but home felt unfamiliar, and I needed to find what that meant to me. It has been almost a decade since I began feeling like a true adult, but that does not mean I no longer want a Steam Deck and more electric guitars for Christmas. Story 23. The kid behind the counter at my local coffee shop called me sir. Story 24. I replaced the soles on a $20 pair of shoes after wearing them for about 8 years. I was going to throw them out, but saw that the soles were inexpensive. It was the most excited I had been in a long time. Story 25. One day, I was playing outside with my brother, and suddenly I began to feel guilty, as if I should not be playing anymore. Story 26. My mom says something typically infuriating, and I just let it slide because I know she will not grow if I try to explain why and how she is being hurtful. Story 27. Around the time I turned 30, almost a decade ago, I absent-mindedly decided to try to jump all the stairs from the porch to the sidewalk, for steps like you would when you were younger. It gave me a week of back pain that I severely regretted. Story 28. If I did not make money, I would not be able to eat. Story 29. Instead of me calling others for advice at work, people call me. Story 30. I was talking about perimenopause with women who are older than I am. Story 31. I have not yet and do not plan to until they put me in a box. Naya boo boo. Story 32. Sending money to my younger siblings whenever they ask. Story 33. It was probably when I had a breakdown because I was unable to pay the rent. Story 34. I had to handle everything after my father's death. My sister was in shambles, and I thought he would live another decade. I had to learn about probate court, wills, and quitclaim deeds. I am a 28-year-old woman. He left his house and land to us. I have only rented my whole life, and I live out of state, so it is a lot to manage. Story 35. I spent a week with my family and realized that everyone is old now. It really set in. Story 36. Buying major appliances. Laughing out loud. Owning a washer and dryer made me feel so grown up. Story 37. I moved across the country for a job to support my partner and me. Story 38. When I bought a really nice truck, I decided to keep a Swiffer duster and a handheld vacuum in the center console. Story 39. We hired a college student to be our dog sitter. We thought we would be relatable as a young couple barely out of college. But when she walked in looking like a baby, I realized how old I am. Story 40. I started waking up naturally and happily at 6 a.m. to do productive things. I walked away from unhealthy friendships. When I broke off those relationships, my soul began to heal. Story 41. When I moved out of my parents' house, I rented an apartment with my girlfriend at the time. Story 42. Since I moved in with my boyfriend and we have broken up, I need to find a new apartment. My parents do not want me back, and my grandparents were not as supportive as I thought, so I have to figure everything out by myself. I have never lived alone before. I am 20 years old for reference. Story 43. Buying groceries for my boyfriend and me during our first week in our apartment felt nice, but it was also a little sad not eating from my dad's fridge anymore. Story 44. I haven't officially grown up yet. I'm 44. All I want for Christmas is Lego. On Saturday, I took my kids for ice cream for lunch because I wanted it. I am flying to Mexico in March and added 2 days to my trip so I can play an augmented reality game while there. You have to grow old. You never have to grow up. Story 45. Walking around a city alone without a chaperone. Buying my own groceries and eating the healthy way I want. Story 46. When my dad passed away, I realized I was truly on my own. It took me another 5 years to accept that. No one is going to step in or fix things for me anymore. There is no backup plan, no safety net. Before, no matter what happened, I had a quiet confidence that things would be okay because my dad would help if everything fell apart. Now I know that is gone, and it feels heavy sometimes. I find myself talking a little longer with my friends' parents or with older people, hoping to feel that same sense of guidance, even if only for a few minutes. Not all older people are wise. Some never really grow up. But when you meet the ones who are, it feels different. Story 47. When I could not go see the cult because I had a bad back. Story 48. The first time I paid rent, I had just moved out and started renting. I still had to go to my rental agent and pay in cash. I will always remember handing over the money for the first time. Story 49. Adults messaged me to chat, and I was baffled because they treated me like an equal until I remembered that I am in my late 30s. I feel about 25 mentally and at least in my mid-60s physically. Story 50. That moment when I was sitting at a parent-teacher meeting for my own kids, and I suddenly thought, wait, I'm the mom here? These are my children. Story 51. When others relied on me, not specifically family, but people leaning on me for advice, my thoughts, and so on. Story 52. Single mother with 2 children. My ex-husband quit his job and child support was cut in half. I had no family or support. I did what I had to do to support us and keep us afloat. Story 53. When I march into a grocery store with my reusable tote bags and a full, organized checklist in hand. Story 54. I was sitting at a table with friends, talking about how we still feel like kids. I said I felt the same, and they paused and told me I was an adult. They pointed out that I have stability and a house. Hit me like a brick. Story 55. I realized that every aspect of life is complex and nuanced. Story 56. I was a teacher on lunch duty when a fight broke out. I walked around the corner and saw a swarm of 13-year-old boys fighting. Some students came running to me for help. I looked around for another adult and realized I was the adult. It was terrifying. Story 57. Becoming an uncle to the children of friends I grew up with. Story 58. When I started worrying about bills instead of ignoring them. Story 59. When I picked up my 18-year-old niece from the airport after a long-haul flight, she burst into tears in my arms, exhausted from having to be a grown-up. I realized she saw me as the adult so she did not have to anymore. That felt like the passing of a baton. Story 60. When I tried to play video games I enjoyed when I was young, I was terrible at them. Story 61. When my girlfriend climbed on me naked, we cranked the music to muffle the main event. Story 62. When I found I could stay a day or two without talking to my mama. Story 63. When I started controlling my emotions, that's when I knew I was growing up. Story 64. Once I realized how to separate my opinions from those of the other people in my life without losing a friendship over it. Story 65. A few moments, honestly. One was when my aunt and uncle's rescue dog was afraid of me, as he was with all men. I was still a teenager then. In undergrad, I worked in a public school helping at-risk kids who genuinely did not know what to think of me. To them, I was a big, scary adult, yet I was still a student, which confused them. Sitting in on a meeting for my graduate clinicals, I joined early and so did the school's dean. We chatted for a bit, and partway through I realized my department had more authority in that meeting than she did. She spoke to me as an adult, not as a kid. Most recently, having my own apartment and going to work every day, I apparently scare the neighborhood kids because I dress up for work a bit, just under business professional, and that seems to make me look intimidating, which I find amusing. Story 66. I got a steam mop for my birthday. It was my favorite present ever. I laughed a lot. Story 67. The pressure of providing as a new husband on a single income, trying to build a business, keeping everyone in my life happy, and juggling a 9-to-5 job is intense. It is far removed from when my only worry was my kill-to-death ratio in Call of Duty in 2012. Story 68. When I saw that it had snowed, my reaction was snow. Ugh, rather than snow. Yay. Story 69. I am going to the grocery store to buy milk and eggs by myself. Story 70. Officially grown up? Don't bet on it. At what moment did I realize I'd officially grown up? Well, that's the thing. I'm not sure I ever did. I raised 6 kids here in Massachusetts, born, bred, and battle-tested north of the Pike. My oldest is 36 now. The youngest are 21-year-old twins who still treat my fridge like a public utility. You'd think somewhere between diapers, college tuition, and the great bathroom wars of 2007 I'd have earned my adulthood badge. But no, there's no ceremony, no certificate in the mail, just a lifetime supply of bills and a constant low-grade sense of, wait, who put me in charge? When you have 6 kids, you learn that growing up is less a milestone and more a long-running prank. Every time you think you've got things under control, life throws another curveball, usually wrapped in laundry. You start to believe the universe's main form of communication is through broken appliances. There were years when the morning routine felt like the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing pit stop. 6 showers, 3 hair dryers, 1 shared mirror, and me standing there with cold coffee, shouting time updates like a deranged air traffic controller. And yet somehow everyone made it out the door, mostly clothed. Now the house is quieter, but don't mistake that for peace. The twins are still home, temporarily, which in Massachusetts time means anywhere between 2 months and forever. The thermostat wars rage on. Apparently 68 degrees is freezing, and I'm Lord Voldemort for suggesting they put on a sweatshirt. So when did I realize I'd grown up? Probably never. Maybe being an adult isn't about knowing what you're doing. It's about pretending you do long enough to keep the whole circus rolling. If I've learned anything, it's this. The minute you take yourself too seriously, one of your kids will remind you that you once locked yourself out of the house in a towel holding a plunger. And that, right there, is the secret to survival in both parenting and New England. Humility, humor, and a good snow shovel. Story 71. The moment my daughter was born and I cut the umbilical cord, I looked at her face, smiled, and said, "Hi, I'm your dad." She gave a wry grin. Life was different after that. Story 72. The first time I bought a toaster, I realized I could use it to toast those Eggo waffles. Some mornings I'd wake up and just stare at it. That little appliance made me so damn happy. Story 73. When I stick it into the hilt, do you like that? Just the tip? No, I don't think I will. Story 74. When I realized that no one was coming to save me but myself, and that society fully recognized me as an adult regardless of whether I saw myself that way, it changed my perspective. At my age, my mother or father already had a 9 or 10-year-old child, while I am single and have no children. It made me realize that although I do not have a child, I could have one now. I could have a 9-year-old child right now. Story 75. I grew up so young that my daily routine now is no different from when I was about 13. I still take care of a child. The only difference is that this child is biologically mine rather than my brother's. I still manage a household, laundry, dishes, and general chores. The only difference is that it is my own house, not my parents', and I choose when to do them instead of being forced. I still struggle with time management. Without dread, disappointment, or the threat of being yelled at to motivate me, I find tasks impossible. Chores glare at me from the dirty floor, begging to be done, and I feel numb. I still receive household appliances as gifts. Last Christmas I asked for a vacuum. At least I asked for it this time instead of being given one because I had complained about sweeping my parents' carpets. I still play video games, but at least I am not shamed for them now. My life is better now, but I never got the sense of accomplishment that comes with growing up, taking on new responsibilities, and becoming an adult. These are things I always did. I think I will be 80 years old and still feel like that 13 or 15-year-old, and only later realize that at some point I was considered an adult. Story 76. That has not happened yet. Just kidding. Getting my college diploma was one. It happened the day after I turned 22. Moving out of my parents' home was another. I was 23. My mother died when I was 37. I got married at 46. The one that would really make me feel it would be buying a house. But at this point that will likely never happen. Story 77. When I first wished I had a place of my own to have some space and do my things. Story 78. When I stopped arguing with my parents and just understood them. Story 79. In the operating room, I held my newborn son while sitting next to my fiancée as she underwent a semi-emergency cesarean section. Story 80. I was only 17 when people started giving me money instead of presents. Story 81. Teenagers I thought were in the same group started calling me boss and sir. I am 22. Story 82. I gradually began to prefer clothing with less flashy designs or logos and a cleaner, more minimalist look. Story 83. I paid all my bills for the month and was immediately broke. Story 84. When I got excited about being able to afford a solid vacuum. Story 85. I was about 18 and standing in line at the grocery store, next in line behind an elderly woman being helped. A mother and her 5-year-old got in line behind me, and I heard her say, "Stand here next to this man and wait while I go get something quickly. Okay?" I slowly turned to look behind me, and there was just the child. My first thought was, "Oh my God, where did the man go?" And then I realized she meant me. Story 86. It was probably when I was 12 that I realized I was more responsible and a better person than my dad. I am not quite an adult yet, but sometimes I feel like I am 30, even though that is more than 10 years away. Story 87. I think I am getting close because I am running out of money. Story 88. When I moved into my first apartment, I sat in the barely furnished space. It was great. Story 89. 3 different people called me sir in 1 week. Felt sudden and jarring. Story 90. My brother, whom I had always looked up to as the absolute pillar of responsibility, has 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and a nice house in Nashville. He was saving for a vacation home in our state and called me to ask whether my company had contract work available because he needed a down payment. That was the moment I realized something had shifted in our family dynamics and I had become the de facto responsible adult. Story 91. Last year I drove my father to the emergency room and had to be the adult because his wife and my grandmother could not cope with the situation. Story 92. I was the only one left to help a relative in need. Story 93. When I realized I no longer need my parents' financial help and could surprise them with wonderful dinners without thinking twice. Story 94. Honestly, I do not think there was one specific moment. It just hit me over time, realizing that no one else is in charge anymore and that I actually have to handle things myself, paying bills, dealing with problems, and comforting my parents instead of the other way around, is when it started to feel real. Story 95. My boss yelled at me, saying that if they had known how my disability affected me, they would never have hired me. I realized that some people have harder lives than others, and that the struggle can last a lifetime. That does not mean life is not worth living. It means you must fight a little harder. Story 96. I am fully off my parents' financial support. The last remaining benefit was being on their health insurance at age 25. Story 97. I woke up on the couch after a nap instead of in my bed. There was no one to carry me there or tuck me in. Typing this brought tears to my eyes. Story 98. When I bought a GameCube for my younger siblings for Christmas, it felt special. Growing up, my parents were the only people who could realistically afford something like that. I was a corporal in the Marine Corps at the time. Story 99. I gave one of my friends serious advice about toxic friendships and relationships. She stopped and said, "You've grown up. You're more mature than you were 4 years ago. You're actually my most mature friend." That surprised me, especially since doctors often say that people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are mentally about 5 years younger than their chronological age. I used to be rampantly immature, insecure, constantly seeking validation, selfish and toxic when I was younger. I'm not that person anymore. I have changed my attitude and behavior and now recognize I was not mentally well back then. It's strange to shift from an unhinged early 20s mindset to a more stable late 20s mindset within just a few years. Story 100. Waking up sick, vomiting from both ends with a high fever. No one to help, no one to comfort or care for me when I was too sick to function. Too broke for a doctor and not in any condition to drive. Feeling weak and helpless, crawling to the trash can and struggling to get some water or over-the-counter medicine just to keep functioning. That made me feel grown up. This might sound like a strange example, but it was about the forced total self-reliance despite the circumstances. That made me realize I was no longer a kid. Story 101. I was married and had a baby. I was earning $9 an hour in customer service and married to a compulsive gambler. I will never forget the day he stole my credit card and took a $5,000 cash advance after swearing for the millionth time that he would never do such a thing. I remember exactly where I was and how I felt when I realized that, for my son to have any chance at a good life, I would have to take the reins of our life. That was the day I grew up. As luck would have it, I went into information technology and have had an incredibly successful career. I have been able to pay for my son's college and his graduate program, and he is happy and healthy. My ex-husband, on the other hand, has never changed and never will. Story 102. I got excited when the weather started getting warm in March because it meant we could hang clothes outside and get twice as much laundry done. Story 103. The birth of my son. I went from being single to having a wife and 2 children in 4 years. I am 38 now, so it is something I have wanted for a long time. Story 104. Moved into a bigger home and provided housing and food for 5 adults without any financial support. Story 105. I was 14, nearly 15. The day I had to go to rehab after a drug overdose. Story 106. I officially felt like an adult when my dad passed away. I wasn't just paying rent anymore. My brother took my dad's truck and ran off with his girlfriend. My mom had no job, no savings, and no idea how to pay for the bills my dad left behind. Her siblings didn't help and told her to figure it out. Then I stepped in. Story 107. My father developed dementia when I was in my early to mid-20s. I used to take him out to lunch, just the 2 of us. At one lunch, I realized the restaurant staff had all noticed I was caring for him, helping him order and manage his utensils. I still felt like a kid in many ways, but in that moment I understood our roles were reversing. It was scary, but sometimes you have to grow up a little faster than you planned. Story 108. When I was asked if I wanted to bring side dishes to family functions, it made me feel like an adult. Story 109. I got a Costco membership of my own volition. Where I live, we do not have an actual Costco. We have stores that resell its products, and the closest full Costco is about 2.5 hours away in another province. For our first anniversary, my husband and I took a road trip to that province, got matching tattoos, and signed up while we were there. Story 110. I became excited about a cast iron pan and the process of seasoning it properly. Story 111. I stopped having any interest in going out on the weekends or doing drugs, laughing out loud. Story 112. When the hospital just let me walk out alone with a newborn baby. Story 113. I booked a trip to Australia with a friend to visit another friend who lives there. On the way to the airport, I had a feeling that someone would come and stop us and say we were not allowed to go. That did not happen. I was 25 when I realized no one was policing my choices or telling me what I could and could not do with my life. Story 114. When I realized I did not have to sacrifice my own comfort for everyone else, I decided they could suck it up or leave. Story 115. 2 things. The first was when I was 16 or 17 and my grandpa died. My mom came to tell me the news, tears streaming down her face. I asked if she needed a hug, and she sat and cried on my shoulder. About 5 years ago, my dad was arrested and faced serious jail time. I packed up my baby and my toddler and drove across 2 state lines so I could put his things into storage and liquidate a few belongings to make sure he had cash on his books. He responded by telling our family I was trying to steal from him and saying he hoped he would die so I could cash in on his belongings. I promptly drove his truck, which I had planned to store in my shop, back to his hometown, left it at my grandpa's house, and told him he could deal with his own child. I walked away and have not looked back. It has been freeing not to have that drama in my life. I definitely put on my big girl panties for that ordeal. Story 116. When I finally chose to be alone instead of being around toxic people, it opened the path to being surrounded by truly awesome people. Story 117. My father died a few months after I turned 18. Story 118. When I became pregnant last November and told our families at Christmas, I felt a familiar uncertainty. Earlier, I had felt the same when I told my mom I was moving out of state with my now husband. During my master's hooding ceremony, when I announced my engagement on our honeymoon while working with high school students, when signing countless documents to buy our home, and while putting together the nursery. Most recently, I said my daughter's name, aloud for the first time while on the phone with her pediatrician. Story 119. I no longer wanted to go out drinking on a Friday night and preferred to stay in and mind my own damn business. Story 120. Sometimes I feel like an ancient soul and a child. Story 121. I was angry at Walmart because they changed the grocery store layout. I was on a mission and now they have messed it up. Story 122. When I started seeing my mother as an individual, I realized I had put her on a pedestal and blamed her for not being the perfect parent for many years. Now it feels mature to be forgiving and compassionate. Story 123. I was 21 when I had to make funeral arrangements for my mother. I didn't know what to do and had no one to ask, so I had to figure it out myself. Story 124. I received a letter from my health insurance saying I am too old to be on my mother's health insurance plan and need to get my own policy. Story 125. When I finally moved into my own place last year, it was just me and my cat. Story 126. When they allowed me to bring my newborn son home from the hospital. Story 127. When I bought Indian laurels for the backyard, I was excited to plant them. Story 128. I bought my first car from a dealership when I was about 23 years old. Story 129. The day I began taking responsibility for my siblings and parents, I vowed to do absolutely anything for them. Story 130. The first time I held my daughter, I was 41. I had always worked, owned a house, and done everything adults do, but I never really felt like a grown-up. The next time I held her, my perspective shifted. I became the best grown-up I could be for her while holding on to the silliness and shenanigans that show life is meant to be fun. Story 131. It was the same moment I realized most adults are still children. Story 132. When I found my old skateboard, I tried to skate to work. I immediately fell flat on my ass and almost broke my wrist. I thought I needed my hands for work and hung up my board for good. Story 133. I became an old man yelling at clouds this year when I realized I could not stop talking about how things used to be better. Story 134. I opened the door on Halloween one year, and a 12 or 13-year-old boy asked whether I had a husband rather than a boyfriend. I'm old. Story 135. I am an only child. My mother died when I was 14. So much for carefree teenage years and beyond. Story 136. The last time I went to a bar, I came home bored, and it never crossed my mind again. Story 137. It was probably when I moved out on my own. I got up, opened a jar of coffee, and had breakfast at my own table. Then I went to use the toilet and it wouldn't flush. I was unaccustomed to apartment living and didn't even think about calling maintenance. I figured out what was broken, went to a hardware store and showed them the broken part. They sold me another one, and I went back and fixed it myself. I felt so accomplished. Story 138. When my friends invited me to get drunk on the weekend, I chose to sleep instead. Story 139. At 21, I walked into my parents' house and found my mother deceased on the couch. I had to plan the funeral and arrange for a sibling to return early from their visit to Japan. I had no knowledge of how to do any of it, but I matured very quickly that month. Story 140. I tossed my toddler in the air, and my back hurt badly for a couple of days. Story 141. They told me I could accrue debt by going to a school that did not care a flying lick about me. Now I am accruing debt by using Karna to get liquor. I am the real winner. Story 142. I am excited to see my newly cleaned stainless steel pan. Story 143. The biggest one was when we had our child. Before that, I felt grown up when I moved into my own house without roommates. At least it felt that way. Now I see how childlike we still were. With a 5-year-old, a deceased parent, and a mortgage, each major life event feels like a really shitty leveling up in officially growing up. Story 144. When a child cried out for a parent, I was the parent. Story 145. Once my savings were finally larger than my checking account, I stopped putting off things I needed to do. Story 146. When John Lennon was murdered, I was 14 and devastated. Story 147. I have done a lot of things that I believed should make me feel grown up. I moved away from home to live alone, paid my own way through college, and slogged through some of the worst jobs imaginable to keep myself afloat. Through all of that, I still felt like I had not grown up. It was not until I had a child and had to be responsible and dependable for him that I truly became an adult. That was well into my 30s. Story 148. When my reaction to socks and underwear as a gift went from ugh to nice. Story 149. When I turned 19, my body felt like 91. Chronic pain is the worst. Story 150. The most recent situation that helped me grow a little was when I had to order drinks at a booth with no menu. I picked a random drink, and it was not even the one I had originally wanted, because the attendant was under pressure. Story 151. I no longer fit in with anyone because of their thinking. Story 152. 49 has not happened yet. I will update you all when it occurs. Story 153. I never grow up, but one good sign I've gotten older is that I genuinely start crashing out in my own mind and show no reaction on the outside. Story 154. When I get stuck at work and try to find someone who knows the solution, I realize I am in the experienced adult group and there is no one more experienced to ask. I need help, but I am the experienced one. Story 155. I noticed women my age appearing in the mature and cougar sections of my favorite websites, as well as in sections labeled with a slang term for older attractive women. Story 156. After losing both of my parents, I was no longer someone's child. Story 157. It may not be the only thing, but the first time it is your responsibility to put a beloved pet down will certainly be high on the list. Story 158. I was 17 and alone after calling 911 to take my single dad to the hospital. A nurse asked my age and said, "Well, you're just a baby." Contrary to her statement, I certainly didn't feel like a baby anymore. Story 159. When I needed a car loan, I did not have established credit. I am trying to pivot my career. I really have to make adult decisions. It is scary, but it is okay. Story 160. After my mother's funeral, which happened a few days after my father's by mere coincidence, it hit me that there was no one left to catch me when I fell. Story 161. When I realized there was no one coming to solve my problems for me, it was up to me to figure things out because there was literally no alternative. I was in my mid-20s, which, not coincidentally, was a terribly difficult and stressful period for me. Story 162. The night before my senior prom, my mom practiced doing my hair, and I broke down crying when I realized I was becoming an adult. Story 163. When someone pointed out that I should stop worrying about what my parents might think of my actions or thoughts, I was 40. Story 164. I am staring at my 4-day-old son as I type this. It is the most recent moment and the most important right now. Story 165. When I got a water and ice dispenser that offered crushed and cubed ice on the outside of my refrigerator door. Story 166. I was making a primary school application for the small child I had inexplicably been allowed to take home from the hospital and care for without instructions for several years. I do not know quite why that was the line, but it was. Story 167. When I realized free time was hard to come by after getting my 9-to-5 job and moving into my own place. Story 168. I was 31 years old when I walked into a Hot Topic at the mall and instantly realized I did not belong there anymore. Story 169. When I started to get excited about buying and receiving furniture and cooking appliances. Story 170. I feel awful the day after drinking and have to take a whole day off. Story 171. When I left home permanently at age 19, I had no help from my family, but I found kind people along the way who helped me. Story 172. I am 23 years old. I was walking on the street and wondered whether a group of children did not have school the next day. It was 3 p.m. Story 173. When my parents started exhibiting symptoms of old age, such as repeating themselves, being unable to walk as fast or as far, and talking about their health problems and how young people need to take care of their teeth, it puts things in perspective when you realize you will be caring for them sooner rather than later and that you will eventually follow the same path. Story 174. When I realized that if I wanted to visit somewhere I could just go, I made it happen. I planned the trip and went. I did not need anyone's permission. Story 175. You notice your parents aging. Not that they weren't aging before. Now it occupies your thoughts often. Story 176. I am 38 and my significant other is part owner of a comic book store. I will let you know. Story 177. When my wife and I were watching Modern Family, I told her to pause it, take a picture of a particular scene with nice curtains, and ask Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer where we could buy similar curtains. I had to do something stupid to make up for my outlandishly adult request, so I began trolling on 4chan. Story 178. I had to say no to someone I admired because he did not have the right attitude. I missed out on a huge job, but I was not going to let someone use me as a lab rat. I said no, and I knew then that I was an adult. Everything else fell into place. I began saying no to the kids I taught, which was hard. Saying no to 5-year-olds was difficult until they got on my nerves. Story 179. It's more like a series of situations. Sometimes it's the way my body fails me, or the way I see my parents aging while I watch home movies of them when they were younger than I am now. I still don't feel grown up, but life reminds me more each year that I am. Story 180. When red velvet became my favorite cake flavor. As a child, I always loved chocolate cake. My mother loved red velvet. I thought it was for older people. Now it's my favorite. Alternate option. When the hospital let me go home with my newborn, I did not feel old enough to raise another human being. I was 32. Story 181. I had to make breakfast for my parents in the morning. Story 182. I gave birth. Now I have no choice but to be an adult. I am laughing out loud. Story 183. After having my son, I escorted a nun and a representative from the La Leche League out of my hospital room. I was not nice about it. Story 184. When I cared about my own accountability, how others moved responsibly and appliances, I never thought a vacuum would excite me. Story 185. In the span of 1 week, I got a new job, moved apartments, and bought a car. I did all of that alone. It was a busy week, but when I had accomplished everything, I thought, well, yes, I'm an adult now. Story 186. Having to pay for and choose my own healthcare plan earlier than the legal cutoff. Story 187. I dreaded concerts that were general admission only and not seated. Story 188. Yesterday, when I was buying a running shoe, I asked Gemini which Nike shoes are inexpensive and can support my old, creaky ankles and feet. Story 189. Recently, I realized I was paying my parents' bills and some of my siblings' bills, and I was making many major decisions in my family's life. They are a great support network and help me immensely with everything, but they definitely look to me to be the man of the house. Story 190. When I was 19, I boarded a plane to go to university in Germany. I lived with my grandparents for a few months, but then decided to live in the student residence near campus. They were disappointed but respected my decision, and I saw them 2 or 3 times a week. I went to their home for supper, did laundry, and spent time with them. Story 191. I stopped wanting to hang out with some of my friends because many of them did not mature beyond high school, and being around them now feels tiresome. Story 192. After I got my own place, I still don't feel fully grown up. Story 193. My obstetrician announced that the baby was a boy. Story 194. My grandmother died when I was in my 20s and left me some money. Instead of going on a spending spree, I paid off my college debt and bought a ring for my girlfriend, who is now my wife. Story 195. When people ask what I want for Christmas, I ask for kitchenware or other household items. My sister and I live together, and last year we received a full set of new pots and pans. I also bought myself a KitchenAid stand mixer, and I still cannot stop talking about how much I love it. Story 196. Guys, will you like this comment so I can get comment karma to post on another subreddit? Please? Also, my mother developed an addiction to alcohol. Story 197. When I started keeping my room clean and staying on top of laundry and chores. Story 198. For me, it was signing a 30-year mortgage as the sole breadwinner for my wife and our 2 children. There was no turning back at that point. Story 199. when the music I grew up with was on a radio station that plays retro old-school music. Story 200. I was alone at 19, driving my 1964 Plymouth Fury through a snowstorm in the middle of the night. There were no cell phones back then. I was heading toward an unknown future and destination. All I had was a deerskin blanket I made myself, jerky from the same deer, a loaf of Wonder Bread, and several cans of Skol. Things got real. Story 201. I had to start dialysis at 25 while maintaining a full-time job. Story 202. I started talking with my boss about the way traffic in my hometown had started getting out of control. I took a long, hard look in the bathroom mirror during my 10-minute break that day. I almost did not recognize the child inside me trying to stare back at the adult I have become. Story 203. I realized I could deal with difficult things, such as illness and anxiety, on my own without needing to call my mom. It still helps to talk to her, but it is nice to know I can handle my problems on my own if need be. Story 204. One of my first jobs was at a call center. The dress code required khakis. When I went to lunch, I wanted to brush crumbs off my hands on my legs, as I always did, but I hesitated. At that moment, I thought, shit, thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.